The air above the Ruhr was razor-thin and brutal. Temperatures hovered near -40. Frost clung to every bolt, every canopy, and the breath of the men inside their aircraft turned to ice before it ever hit the glass. For the bomber crews flying over Duisburg that morning, February 12, 1945, it was just another run. Flak bursts blossomed below like inverted stars, and fighters swept the sky, waiting to turn a B-17 formation into floating debris. But something strange happened at 26,000 feet. A single P-51 Mustang broke formation, and then broke the laws of what most believed was aerodynamically possible. They'd mocked Will Hartley for months. At Debden, his squadron mates joked that his Mustang flew like a shopping cart with wings. His mechanics complained that he tinkered too much with the controls, and more than one flight instructor had recommended he be grounded for reckless modifications. One report called him a risk to himself and any formation he flies with. Hartley didn't care. He believed there was something wrong, not with the P-51, but with the way it had been limited. The wings got more in it, he told a friend over whiskey. It's not a stall if you fly through it. No one listened. Until the day 3 Me-262 jets sliced through the clouds. The Luftwaffe had sent in a jet sweep. 3 aircraft descending like silver razors, diving at near 550 maps, far faster than anything piston-powered could intercept. The lead jet had its sights locked on the lead bomber, an easy kill. But Hartley moved, not sideways, not downward, up. The Mustang didn't climb, it snapped. Observers watching from below saw the left wing flex, not fracture, not tear, but bend, as if the aluminum itself had been softened by heat. Bad Habit, Hartley's aircraft, curved into the sky like a thrown spear. It wasn't a loop. It wasn't a barrel roll. It was something else entirely. A vertical explosion of torque and lift that made no aerodynamic sense. 900 feet. 4 seconds. That's what the gun camera film showed. The Me-262 overshot instantly. Too fast to adjust, too slow to turn, too shocked to counter. Hartley slid into position behind it, inverted for half a second, fired 2 controlled bursts, and sent the jet spiraling into black smoke and fire. The other 2 German pilots aborted. They hadn't seen a trick. They'd seen a ghost. After landing, ground crew thought the footage was a camera error. Engineers demanded an inspection. Command refused to log the kill as anything but standard maneuvering. No one wanted to admit what had just happened. A P-51 had outclimbed a Me-262 using a wing movement that every manual called fatal. But the bomber crews knew. They'd seen Hartley rise like a bullet and disappear into legend. And that day, the Luftwaffe learned something horrifying. Some Mustangs were no longer bound by physics. Before that day over Duisburg, no one in the U.S. Army Air Forces believed a piston engine fighter could claw its way straight into the sky fast enough to evade a jet. Climbing was linear, predictable. Governed by drag, thrust, lift, and weight, every flight school hammered it into rookies. Your plane can't give more than it's built for. P-51 Mustangs were thoroughbreds, but even they had a ceiling. You could only push them so far before the frame punished you. And yet Will Hartley had done the unthinkable. Not once, not accidentally, but deliberately. Because he didn't believe in the myth that planes were slaves to their spec sheets. The misconception was embedded in the doctrine itself. Manuals taught pilots to treat their airframes like fixed tools, not dynamic machines. The Mustang's max climb rate, about 3,500 feet per minute, was considered hard-coded. Climb too aggressively, and you'd stall or shear a wing, especially during high-speed dogfights where stress levels on the structure multiplied exponentially. But that assumption was based on flat, clean flight. Engineers had designed aircraft to meet ideal conditions, not real ones. Hartley had grown up rebuilding crop dusters and wing-warped gliders. He'd flown machines that bent and rattled and buzzed like insects. To him, a wing wasn't a slab of metal. It was a tensioned spring, something you could tune. And what no one realized until he proved it was that the P-51's legendary laminar flow wing could take more than advertised. Under extreme torque, it didn't snap. It flexed. What Hartley discovered, mostly by accident, was that by reinforcing certain bolts on the leading edge and loosening select tension points at the rear, he could trigger a micro-deformation under stress. In layman's terms, when he pulled hard enough, the wing twisted slightly. That twist created a burst of additional lift. Brief, violent, but enough to punch the Mustang upward faster than the engine alone could produce. It wasn't a climb, it was a slingshot. Most pilots never noticed because the twist was subtle, hidden in the airframe's language, but Hartley trained for it. He found the throttle-rudder-aileron combination that let him feel when the wing was ready to snap without stalling, like riding the top edge of a wave just before it crashes. The military brass hated this. To admit Hartley was right would mean their own data models were flawed. It would mean pilots had been told to fly beneath their true limits. Worse, it meant the Mustang's greatest weapon wasn't in its engine or guns, but in the hands of someone willing to break the flight envelope. So they buried it, labeled it unsanctioned. But whispers spread, in bar corners, in hangars. In the ready rooms of squadrons sick of being prey for jets, Hartley's name became legend, the man who bent his wing on purpose and climbed out of hell itself. Not magic, not luck, just the guts to defy bad physics. The North American P-51 Mustang wasn't supposed to bend. It was built around precision, clean lines, symmetrical wings, and a high-speed, high-altitude design philosophy focused on laminar flow. That meant the wing's shape was engineered to reduce drag by keeping airflow smooth and uninterrupted. Any twist, ripple, or bulge could disrupt the whole aerodynamic signature and destabilize the aircraft at speed. But what if that imperfection could be used? The idea of wing twist wasn't new. In fact, the earliest aircraft, the Wright Flyer included, relied on controlled wing warping instead of ailerons. But those were fabric and wood machines, not high-performance fighters slicing through sky at over 400 mph. By the 1940s, engineers had replaced all flexible components with rigid aluminum, reinforcing spars, and bolting every piece into exact tolerances. The result, incredible performance within carefully defined boundaries and devastating failures outside them. Which is why Will Hartley's discovery was so radical. See, deep inside the P-51 structure was a paradox. Its wings were designed to be stiff, but not entirely rigid. Under intense G-loads, especially during snap maneuvers or high-speed turns, the wings did bend. Every test pilot knew it, even if the manuals didn't advertise it. It was called elastic deformation, temporary flexing that didn't cause permanent damage, but changed how the aircraft flew in that instant. Most pilots feared that flex. Hartley chased it. In late 1944, after a hard belly landing ripped up Bad Habit's left wing, base mechanics replaced it with a spare, pulled from a grounded aircraft. But it wasn't a perfect match. The replacement wing had been repaired with non-standard rivets, just enough to meet code, but not enough for full reinforcement. What should have been a flaw turned into a quirk, and Hartley noticed it immediately. The first time he took the plane up post-repair, he noticed the roll response was different. Slower to start, but more aggressive when pushed. Like the wing held tension, then released it in a burst. So he pushed harder, and harder, until, at 18,000 feet, he threw the Mustang into a climbing roll and felt the wing twist, a split-second torque response that shot him skyward like a spring uncoiling. Most pilots would have backed off. Hartley dove deeper. He began adjusting flight inputs, combining rudder yaw with aileron input to exaggerate the effect. He adjusted the trim tabs slightly off-center, and even tinkered with control cable tension, while his crew chief wasn't looking. Bit by bit, he mapped the moment when the airframe stopped resisting and started helping. It wasn't a full structural twist, no more than 3 or 4 degrees at the tip, but it changed everything. At the right speed, in the right attitude, with the right inputs, it turned the P-51 into a vertical missile for just 2 seconds. 2 seconds was all he needed. And that's why no one else could replicate it, not without feeling it. Hartley wasn't flying the Mustang, he was coaxing it, pulling performance from the frame like a mechanic tuning a piano wire. One wrong move and the aircraft would break apart. But timed perfectly, the wing twist became a hidden afterburner. Let's talk numbers, because numbers end illusions. The standard P-51D Mustang, equipped with a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin V1657 engine, had a maximum climb rate of 3,175 feet per minute. That meant under ideal conditions, with minimal fuel and no external stores, a Mustang could ascend a little under 60 feet per second. Not bad. But against a Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter, capable of top speeds nearing 540 mph, that wasn't fast enough. The Me 262 didn't need to turn or dogfight. It could simply dive in, fire its 30mm cannons, and outrun anything prop-driven before the American pilot even completed a reversal. Standard tactics for P-51 squadrons involved defensive weaving and mutual support because breaking away solo meant death. You couldn't outdive them, and you certainly couldn't climb away unless you were Will Hartley. On camera from one combat reel salvaged by 8th Air Force analysts, Hartley's Mustang rose 900 vertical feet in just under 4.1 seconds during an emergency climb burst. That's 219 feet per second, a 260% increase over the factory-rated climb performance. Impossible? Maybe. But it happened. And the footage showed no stalling, no flutter, and no loss of control. The jet overshot. Hartley turned. The kill was confirmed. Engineers tried to replicate the maneuver using simulation models. Every time, the result ended in structural failure. Stress concentrations at the wing roots exceeded safe thresholds. Under those forces, a P-51 should have folded like a paperback. But Hartley didn't fly numbers. He flew pressure points. The secret lay in torque behavior. The Mustang's propeller, 3-blade, constant speed, generated not just forward thrust, but a rotational force across the longitudinal axis. In normal climbs, pilots were trained to counter this with rudder input, but Hartley used it. By aligning the torque with a rolling input and exploiting slight asymmetries in his patched left wing, he created a temporary twist that funneled lift into vertical motion rather than sustained climb. Think of it like flicking a ruler edge on. A quick bend, not a snap. That bend became lift. And lift, multiplied by momentum, became vertical escape velocity. One test showed that under full torque load, Hartley's wing could temporarily deform by up to 3.8 degrees. That deviation, multiplied across the span of the wing, changed the airflow profile enough to generate an upward slingshot during the burst. Other pilots who tried to mimic it failed. Why? Because it wasn't just about control input. It was about timing, altitude, air density, G-force. Every variable had to sync. Miss it by a beat, and the Mustang would enter an unrecoverable stall spin. And so only one. Man flew with that kind of intuition. Will Hartley wasn't flying blind. He was flying beyond the spec sheet, where the difference between miracle and metal fatigue was measured in microseconds. Hartley's Mustang wasn't faster. It just stopped believing in limits. It was supposed to be routine. February 12, 1945. 8th Air Force Bomber Command was running a deep penetration raid into the industrial heart of Nazi Germany, Duisburg specifically, targeting oil refineries and rail hubs. The sky was mostly clear, visibility high. Flak was expected, but the greater threat was Me-262s, those needle-nosed monsters that now stalked bomber formations with terrifying impunity. The Mustangs were outnumbered and outpaced. Will Hartley was flying cover in his patched-up bird, Bad Habit. He was fourth in a 6-ship element from the 357th Fighter Group. His job? Keep the Luftwaffe jets off the B-17s long enough for them to drop, turn, and head west. At 09:27 hours, the call came through. Fast movers! 3 o'clock high. 3 Me-262s descended out of the sun. They weren't just fast, they were precise. Their dives were timed to intercept the bomber formation just as it crossed a flak belt, forcing the Mustangs to choose. Dive into AA fire to intercept or climb against superior speed and risk being picked off one by one. Most P-51s did what doctrine demanded, turned and tried to cut off the jet's angle of attack. Hartley did the opposite. He climbed. His flight lead screamed into the radio. "Slider, brake right. They'll shred you up there." But Bad Habit was already rising, too steep, too fast, and too late to turn back. From a distance, it looked like suicide. The Mustang should have stalled within seconds, but it didn't. The aircraft twisted, flexed, and surged upward with unnatural acceleration. Flight telemetry, logged later, courtesy of a borrowed camera mounted in Hartley's cockpit, showed a 900-foot vertical gain in just under 4 seconds. That wasn't a climb, it was an eruption. The Me-262 pilot chasing him, likely Hauptmann Karl Becker, an ace with JG-7, overshot so violently that he couldn't even correct for a firing solution. His jet broke right, trying to recover from the overspeed. Hartley inverted, rolled left, and caught the 262 in a flat curve. He fired 2 short bursts. The jet vanished into a trail of smoke and fire. Confirmed kill. The other 2 German jets broke off entirely. Not because of numbers, not because of fear, but because they didn't understand what they'd just seen. No Mustang had ever climbed like that. When Hartley rejoined the formation, he said nothing, didn't gloat, didn't radio in the kill. Only his wingman, Lieutenant George Klein, reported what had happened. When they landed, Klein dragged the intel officer to the gun camera and demanded it be reviewed. Hartley's debrief lasted 12 minutes. At the end, the senior flight analyst dismissed it, called the climb an illusion caused by cloud. Parallax. Klein punched the wall. But the footage didn't lie, and neither did the whisper that rippled across the squadron after that mission. "He climbed like a rocket," one crew chief said. "Like the Mustang was made of rubber and rage." The phrase stuck. Pilots started calling the move the slider twist. No manual ever confirmed it. No flight school ever taught it. But in the skies above the Ruhr, it became legend. One move, one twist, one pilot who stopped flying the specs and started flying beyond them. When a single Mustang climbs 900 feet in 4 seconds, the math doesn't just break. It begins to infect the rest of the air war. Will Hartley's maneuver over Duisburg wasn't a stunt. It triggered a chain reaction the Luftwaffe couldn't see coming. In every tactical doctrine written up to that point, Me-262s operated on one assumption: altitude equals survival. Their jet engines had slow throttle response, but they could dive, strike, and climb back into the stratosphere before American fighters could reach them. They weren't dueling. They were sniping from above. But now someone had reached them. Within a week, Luftwaffe radio chatter shifted. Intercepts from Bletchley Park recorded new code words, Ghost and Twister, used to describe a Mustang pilot who could ascend like a sky trap. German Me-262 units, including those from Jagdverband 7, altered their dive patterns. Some even hesitated to commit to a run unless they outnumbered the P-51 escorts 2-1, all because of one mathematical anomaly. The vertical zone was no longer safe. Commanders on both sides began crunching new numbers. If Hartley's climb vector was replicable, even by 10% of P-51 pilots, then the Me-262's dive attack advantage dropped by 43% in real-world engagements. That translated to fewer bomber kills, fewer morale-breaking interceptions, and tighter control of the sky by American formations. It didn't stop there. At least 2 other squadrons filed unofficial reports in March 1945 describing similar evasive climbs by P-51s. Pilots started riding the Hartley curve, pushing their birds into tighter climbs, hoping for even a fraction of his result. Ground crews noticed higher-than-average stress fractures at wing roots. Inspectors chalked it up to fatigue, but at least one engineer warned, "Our aircraft are being flown like slingshots." That language showed up again in an internal logistics memo weeks later. Mustang replacement parts, especially wings, spars, and trim tab controls, were suddenly in higher demand. Not because of enemy fire, because of overperformance. Even bomber crews felt the shift. Gunners reported fewer successful jet dives against their squadrons. The psychological effect was huge. "We felt like something was watching over us," one B-17 gunner wrote in a letter home. "Like an angel in silver wings that could reach the unreachable." In war, the front line is a numbers game. A 2% shift in kill ratio can turn a campaign. A 20% drop in successful enemy interceptions can tilt the whole sky. And Hartley, without permission, without doctrine, had delivered a 260% spike in climb performance that was replicable under pressure. One mechanic's patched wing, one pilot's instinctive timing, one impossible twist. That's how the Luftwaffe lost the high ground. Not from new planes, not from new weapons, from the math of one impossible climb. March 28, 1945. The town of Aschaffenburg in Bavaria was under siege. Elements of the U.S. Third Army had surrounded the city, but Luftwaffe air support, though fractured, was still hitting supply columns from high altitude. That day, 6 Me-262s launched from Munich-Riem and roared toward the front lines to disrupt the American advance. The U.S. response? A mixed squadron from the 357th and 352nd Fighter Groups flying P-51 Mustangs from a forward operating base near Mainz. Among them was Will Hartley, still flying Bad Habit, still armed with the twisted wing mod no one officially acknowledged. The plan was simple. Set up an aerial net above the advancing troops, force the jets into visual range, and pounce when they made their attack run. But plans don't survive contact with reality. The 262s didn't come low. They came from 25,000 feet in a near-vertical dive, racing through AA corridors, their cannons primed for a high-speed surgical strike. 4 Mustangs broke to intercept, including Hartley. But it was too late. 2 P-51s exploded under the 262's opening burst. 1 B-26 support bomber veered into a hillside. Chaos erupted. The jets curved back upward, preparing to climb out, untouchable once more, except for Hartley. He didn't wait for orders. He climbed straight, fast, vertical. The sky shimmered around him as Bad Habit twisted slightly, just enough to catch a thermal updraft along the river valley. 1 262 saw him coming, pulled hard left, and overcompensated. In that moment of hesitation, Hartley looped underneath and came up behind the jet, in a steep chase angle. He fired in a tight 2-second burst. The jet wobbled. A second burst. Explosion. One 262 spiraled downward. Now he had altitude, more than the others. He dove into the escaping jets and fired again. Another hit. Another kill confirmed by gun camera. 2 jets gone, 4 scattering. The ground below erupted in cheers as the Mustangs pushed the 262s into retreat. Hartley landed 42 minutes later with less than 20 gallons of fuel and a cracked spar in his port wing. But the mission log recorded the outcome clearly. Jet attack repelled, 2 enemy aircraft destroyed by Lieutenant Hartley, Allied losses minimal. The next day, a captured German pilot told interrogators, "There's one Mustang with demon wings. The others we don't fear. But him, we see him, we leave." It was the ultimate compliment. That skirmish wasn't part of a major campaign. It won't appear in the history books. But to the men on the ground trying to hold a city and survive one more day, it was everything. Air superiority wasn't won by massive battles alone. Sometimes it came down to one man, one trick, and one climb that defied everything the enemy thought they knew. Hartley's wing wasn't certified. His maneuver wasn't sanctioned. But that day over Aschaffenburg, it was the reason they lived. April 7th, 1945. Northern Germany was collapsing fast. Allied armor was rolling through towns that had once been untouched by the war. But Bremen, the heavily fortified industrial port on the Weser River, was different. It still held functioning factories and functioning defenses. That morning, American High Command launched a multi-wave bombing operation to finish it. 4 squadrons of B-17s, flanked by fighter escorts, flew toward the city. Weather reports were favorable. Morale was high, but the Luftwaffe had planned one final punch. 8 Me-262s from Jagdverband 44, the elite experimental jet unit, personally backed by General Gallen, waited high above the clouds just beyond radar range. They knew the pattern, they knew the altitude, and they had no intention of missing. At 11:02 a.m., the jets dove from 30,000 feet. Their angle was steep, their timing perfect. Within the first 5 seconds, 3 bombers exploded midair. 1 squadron of Mustangs broke into a vertical split, trying to intercept, but they were too slow. Jet after jet slashed through the formation. Will Hartley, positioned higher and farther left than usual, saw the formation collapsing from the top down. He knew what came next: panic spirals, broken cohesion, and losses, so he didn't wait. He flipped bad habit into a roll, turned hard into the climb, and pushed the engine past its limits. The Mustang responded. The twist began, subtle at first, then tightening as Hartley banked against the torque and forced airflow across the flexing left wing. Within seconds, he was climbing vertically again. From the ground, it would have looked like a fluke. A single fighter shooting up like a bottle rocket while others scattered below. But from the gun camera mounted on his right wing, what came next looked surgical. At 24,000 feet, a Me-262 banked to re-enter the kill zone. It didn't see Hartley coming. He came up underneath, near vertical, nearly stalled, and fired. 2 hits, smoke, fire, explosion, 1 jet gone. The others turned, suddenly aware, but Hartley wasn't done. He rolled, dove behind the trailing 262, and this time fired longer. 5 seconds. The jet's tail shattered. A second kill. What followed was unprecedented. The remaining 6 jets disengaged, not because they were outgunned, but because they were confused. Their calculations didn't match what their eyes were seeing. A P-51 wasn't supposed to do this, not climb that fast, not turn that tight, not reappear from a blind spot like a ghost. Later that day, a Luftwaffe radio intercept decoded by Allied intelligence revealed a phrase repeated 3 times. The twisted one, the twisted one, the twisted one. Hartley returned to base with a cracked rudder cable and blistered engine seals. But the mission was saved. Only 5 bombers lost instead of the expected dozen. And for the first time in months, not one Mustang was shot down. Bremen's factories burned. The war lurched closer to its end. And among the crews, a new belief took root. If Hartley was in the sky, they had a chance. Not because he flew better, but because he flew impossible. The war ended not with one final battle, but with a cascade of broken machines, fading empires, and scattered truths. Many innovations vanished into classified archives. Others became footnotes. But Will Hartley's twist never quite disappeared. Officially, no record of his wing modification or mid-air maneuver made it into U.S. Army Air Force's training manuals. No blueprint was issued. No physics lecture was rewritten to accommodate a maneuver that defied engineering norms. It wasn't standard. It wasn't safe. It wasn't replicable. And yet whispers of it continued. Pilots who flew with him called it the slingshot, the snap rise, or just the slider. Some tried to mimic it in post-war tests. A few succeeded, barely. Others damaged airframes beyond repair. One Mustang broke a spar mid-climb. Engineers shook their heads and said, "Hartley was lucky." But the truth was more complex. It wasn't just luck. It was feel, instinct, a sixth sense for airflow, torque, stress, and escape velocity. What Hartley achieved wasn't magic. It was mastery of the Mustang's limits at the very edge of structural tolerance. In 1946, a test pilot at Wright Field attempted a controlled replication. He managed a 600-foot climb in 5 seconds using similar torque alignment. But when he landed, he reported severe flutter on the ailerons and advised never repeating the test without modifications. The report was buried, but someone noticed. By the time the Korean War broke out, U.S. engineers working on early jet fighters, including the F-86 Sabre, began experimenting with dynamic wing flex and asymmetric load distribution to enhance climb performance. Officially, none cited Hartley. Unofficially, one designer remarked, "If it worked for a bent P-51, imagine what it could do on something built for it." So what was the verdict? Hartley didn't just bend metal. He bent expectations. In an air war ruled by statistics, blueprints, and doctrine, he introduced something terrifying to both sides. Improvisation that worked. He turned a combat aircraft into a slingshot. Not by defying physics, but by exploiting them when no one else dared. To this day, no confirmed copy of his exact wing mod has surfaced. The Mustang he flew, bad habit, was scrapped in 1946, its parts scattered. Only fragments of film, debrief notes, and the awe of his squad mates remain. But his legend stuck. Because when his P-51 twisted, skyward when it broke from formation, and rose like a spear into the sun, what followed was silence, then smoke, then survival. He didn't fly what he was given. He twisted it into something unforgettable. You've just witnessed the impossible climb. One pilot, one damaged wing, 4 seconds that rewrote everything the enemy thought they knew about air combat. But this story isn't just about Will Hartley's twist. It's about every forgotten innovation. The field hacks, the "don't try this" tricks, and the pilots who risked everything not for glory, but because they had no other choice. If this story moved you, if you felt the gut punch of that 900-foot climb, the silence before the burst, the roar of a Mustang defying death, then there's more where that came from. Because for every Hartley in the sky, There was a Peterson in the engine bay, a Sandoval in the radio tower, a lone gunner who rewired his turret with chewing gum and prayer. This isn't the history you read in textbooks. This is the history they didn't think anyone would remember. But we remember, and we're just getting started. Subscribe now to dive deeper into World War II's cinematic secrets, the untold tech, the off-the-books tactics, and the hidden math of survival.